Good afternoon, basic people. Welcome to the People's Basics. It is Monday, April 26th, and we are joined today to do an Ask Me Anything video where we online ask you all to send us some of the questions of the burning things that you're looking to know about, either myself, the People's Basics, etc. Policy-wise, there's a lot that we got to cover. It's an Ask Me Anything. And so we want to encourage you all, if you do join us along the way during this video, do come ask us any questions. But we do have plenty that have been submitted in advance. And so we're going to hop into today's video, sharing our screen of some of the questions that you all sent us. But before we do that, I want to remind you all, if you like what you're seeing today, make sure you hit those like and share buttons so that we can actually, start to grow the movement and be able to make more people able to see the need for the universal basics. It really helps us out, so we really encourage you all to do that. But without any further ado, let's get into today's questions. So I'm going to share the screen here that we got, and we have a bunch of questions. So the first question that we got was from Grayson Asbeth, and his question was, should the U.S. overthrow regimes if clear evidence of mass violence against its people is clear? And so, Grayson, my answer to you on that is that I would personally say that we should not be looking to do it on a unilateral basis, but that, yes, we should be looking to intervene. As a global community, if this is a violation of human rights, I believe it is our responsibility to try and stop despots from abusing their people. But I don't believe it is our right as a unilateral nation to be the police of the world. I think this is something that should be upheld with the global community. But yeah, I would 100% say that there are cases where intervention is necessary. Let's say, for instance, in the case of World War II, let's say they just kept it within their own circles of committing genocide and did not continue to try and spread outward. Should we not have tried to stop the concentration camps of Nazi Germany and the civil rights abuses there? There are many cases we could go through of human rights violations. Should we have let those people be massacred? I think it's our right as a global community, a human race, to try and protect at least some basic norms of human rights. And so I do think there is a case for intervention, but I just don't believe that it's right for us to do it on a unilateral basis. Okay, let's go back in. So now, our next question that we got. This comes from OK Stanley Blog. Also, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? So, advice that I would give to my 18-year-old self. One of the things that I would tell them, beyond just like buy Bitcoin, is probably do something along the lines of probably, frankly, don't stress yourself out too much. Like at that point in my life, I was taking things too seriously. I was frankly also very, very dependent on the opinions of others. And it's been a long journey of trying to find more and more internal validation. And so, maybe I guess the advice I would just be able to give is that it's breathe, that you have to understand that time is like a long process, and that I know something might feel like the end of the world right now, but you're going to look back at this in 8 years and be like, you know what? I'm stronger for this. I've learned a lot for this. And that in the grand scheme of things, those moments were actually quite small. I am very proud that we are still here today, surviving through what we did at that time. But I would just say breathe and understand that patience is a virtue in this case. It's not all going to come at you at once, and that you don't have to have all your decisions all lined up by the age of 18. You're going to make some mistakes, and that's okay. You'll still survive. But that would be the advice beyond, obviously, let's be all real. Every single person, other than there's if you're traveling back in time, there's always the kill baby Hitler stuff that people will say. They always go back and tell themselves, okay, look into this one investment because we could do a lot of good with that. We could do a lot of good things here at the network and around the world if we could be able to grow our wealth and be able to then send it back out to the people. And so that would be something I would do as well. But let's go back. Next question. So the next question, favorite historic city-state. I'll be honest, I don't know too many city-states offhand. Obviously, you got the things like Athens Sparta that kind of come to mind, like a lot of the Greek city-states. And I'll be honest, I definitely would prefer Athens for being kind of the like center of democracy in a sense, like more so than the warrior culture of Sparta that does get a lot more attention in the media for, it's a lot easier to make a movie about violence than it is to make a movie about the creation of democracy, probably. There's a lot more action scenes that you could fit in, but I'll go with Athens. I'm no expert on city-states. I'll openly admit to that. Those were the only two that come offhand, so I'm going to pick Athens over Sparta. Let's go to the next question. Would you want Andrew, I'm going to assume Andrew Yang, Andrew to run for president in 2024, 2028, or 2032? My answer is not 2024. I highly doubt that he would run for president after only one term as mayor. And as you know, we just did a video on this on Friday. We are supporting Andrew Yang here at the network. I've personally endorsed him. I live in the area, so this is an election that matters a lot to me. So yeah, I'm hoping he wins. And if that's the case, I really doubt he'll do 2024. Now, 2028 versus 2032, I think largely depends on what happens in 2024. Now, if Joe Biden is, running again and he wins re-election, I think 2028 is potentially in the cards depending on how things are going around that time period. It would kind of be a wait and feel it out. But I generally am more expecting that 2032 is the more realistic time frame for us all. But I wouldn't rule out 2028, especially if hypothetically, let's say we don't win in 2024. Let's say, I don't know, Kamala Harris becomes the nominee and we somehow lose to the Republicans. Well, then in that case, 2028 makes a lot of sense to me, because then that'll be also when Yang is likely expecting to wrap up being New York City's mayor as well. So I think that's reasonable. But if I was to really say picking of them, of all the, potentially forecasted realities of 2024 and beyond, I'd probably say 2032. That's just my gut feeling, but we will see. That one of the things we'll all see is when it comes to predicting the very far out future, we all end up looking pretty stupid in the end. There are so many things that we just don't see coming. Like, I mean, come on. Like, if you told me, I don't know, 12 years ago, literally, that Trump would be president at one point, I wouldn't have seen it coming. But like, it happened. So it's like, take all this with a grain of salt. There's so much that could happen in between them. It's like, well, what happens if we already have universal basic income by then? What if we have some of these things that were the root causes of why he ran for president? Is he still as inclined to want to run? I know on the campaign trail, frankly, he admitted that a lot of the times the process is brutal. Think about just trying to campaign for president. It is a constant on-the-run thing. You're constantly under the scrutiny of the media, especially when it comes to the presidency. And so you're also, as he said, he was away from his kids a lot. Now, obviously, by that point in time, they're certainly older kids, so it might not be as hard. But I debate if he'll actually do it. We will see. But again, to answer your question, Namdi, 2032. Let's go to our next question. Okay, a boy kicks a soccer ball. It goes 10 feet and comes back to him. How did it happen? I mean, there's a lot of ways that could happen. I mean, a boy kicks a ball 10 feet away and it hits off a wall and it comes back. A boy kicks a ball up a hill and then it rolls down. I mean, we could go all day. A boy kicks a ball 10 feet away and then someone kicks it back to him. There's a lot of different solutions to that I would say. And I don't know if it's supposed to be some trick question, but I that's where I'm going with here. It's a very literal and there's a lot of different ways you could do it. Okay, let's go to our next question after that. Okay, comes from Jacqueline, the Fab Socialist, new member of the network too. She asks, what are the biggest pros and cons of Andrew Yang? This is a great question. I'm going to start off with the negative so that we can end on the positive. So I would say the negative. It obviously depends on like kind of what offices you're evaluating, like what is his specific weaknesses. But in the political realm, I've generally found Yang's weaknesses to be one, I sometimes feel like he's drifted away from being a core message guy into being kind of like a bunch of different messages guy. And it kind of makes the feeling of it's like all over the place and allows people to attack the gimmicks. It was very hard to demonize an Andrew Yang when everyone just kind of knew him as I give you money. Now, obviously, there are downsides to that too. You can come off as a gimmick. But I do think sometimes he gets a little bit stretched thin and loses focus. I also think this kind of applies in some of the organizational structure stuff. It very much seems like he does try to move from like one group to another. He sets a very large goal. He does play the executive role in trying to vision set and try and give advice to the different teams. But he doesn't seem like the person who does as much of the organizational development to build kind of like the nuts and bolts infrastructure kind of within a group. So that's another one. Policy wise, you got things like foreign policy. I think that his approaches to how we handle allies that we think are still doing problemsome behavior is a little bit not strong enough, essentially, as a position. I think we do need to have a forceful position in setting foreign policy and trying to be a leader on the global stage. That doesn't mean, obviously, we want to be the global police and have to do all of our leadership on the military front. We should be embracing diplomacy. And I think, for example, regards to let's go with Israel as an example, very close ally of ours in the Middle East. I still agree that they should be. People can disagree with that all they want. I think that they align with us more on our core value set than a lot of the surrounding countries within the region. As well, they are a major player in key technology sector things that we'd like to be aligned with. Now, here's the thing, though. They are still doing abominable things in terms of some of their settlement practices. It has been widely condemned by the global community, and we were one of the veto votes against it because, well, Trump was very much in the pocket of they can do no wrong. That's how much of an ally they are. And for a lot of our politicians, they kind of take that same tact. I personally think aspects of kind of like BDS are not great. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that it includes the sanction aspect to it. But I do have to say, we should be considering foreign aid that we already give as a tool. How much help are we going to give you when it's going to be not helping necessarily people have a higher quality of life overall in the world? I think it harms us when we get ourselves involved in enabling potential, human rights violations. And so I think we should be looking at trying to get Israel to the point where we can actually negotiate something like a two-state solution. And I feel like Yang takes a bit more of a laissez-faire approach to foreign policy than I would even like. So that's one aspect. And then I think there are certain things where it's like he doesn't necessarily lead like all the time on where people are. He kind of like almost speaks to where people might need to go in the future, but like he doesn't kind of hit them where they're already thinking. So for instance, like healthcare, he tried to move the debate into trying to talk more about cost adjustment instead of trying to talk about, which was the main conversation point within the primary, the actual insurance side of things. Now, mind you, he's made points on it on the debate stage, but when it came to the formal policy release and what the campaign focused on down the home stretch, it was certainly a little bit different of a message. And so I think he sometimes needs to just focus more on just the core issues and making sure that you're talking to people where they are. Because he's a smart guy. He understands the system and the root causes. And sometimes I think he aims to be almost a bit too like what we want to achieve instead of giving himself any flexibility of anchoring his positions. And so those are some of the issues that I have. Now, pros, obviously we've talked about this in the past on many occasions. Big fan of his overall policy platform. I think he's one of the best domestic policy candidates I've seen in a very long time. The core issues of our organization are very clearly aligned with his vision of universal basic income and universal basic services as well. as well. He has a big focus on democracy reform issues, as do we. And I also think he can take a pretty good balance of our even core value set of liberty, justice, and security. So it's just like I can go all day about his policy platform, and we've done it so many times in the past. I've already answered for a very long time. So everyone, go look for other content that we've done on Andrew Yang and why we like him if you are so inclined. But yeah, I just feel like he aligns with us on like 99% of our like policy, and he kind of preaches the same value set as we do. So I think we're very much aligned. We try to make the movement more than just a Yang movement, but obviously the Yang Gang is a huge core group of our support here at the People's Basics because they align with us in knowing that we need these universal basics for the people. Let's go to our next question. So we got our next question from, oh, my lovely co-host. Hello, Jackie. You got a question for me on, am I a fruit or a vegetable? Okay. So I guess I'd say I'm a vegetable, and I'll go with this as my reasoning. I'm a bit more, I guess, reserved as an individual, so I'm not like necessarily popping with flavor. I think I can be substantive at times. It's kind of like it's a bit more nutritious vegetables than fruit. I try to be a bit more grounded as an individual, which is, I guess, more vegetables than fruit. And I guess, I mean, I'm kind of an indoors person more often than not. I could be like a vegetable on the couch, I guess, but I don't know. I'm stretching. I don't know. I guess I'll be a vegetable. Okay, next question. We got Angie. Angie asks, if I ran for president of the United States, what would my platform be? Oh, boy. So obviously, there's going to be some core aspects that you've heard here already in the universal basic income, universal basic services and rights. But I think part of the way I'd be trying to structure this is into like two main categories. Like there's generally infrastructure, things that we need to build essentially and kind of redesign the way the actual inherent system works. And then there's the second side, which is kind of just the people side of it and providing care for one another, as well as potentially even care for our environment. So I kind of structured it as like infrastructure and community care as like the two core pillars. And then you'd have kind of a value set as like the third pillar, if I was like trying to think of like structuring a website page. And then within infrastructure, the key focuses would be transportation, housing, the energy grid, sanitation and waste management, surveillance, banking, our general supply chain, and democracy. And, you know, things like within housing, we would even have things like utilities as well that people have, like internet, water, and electricity. And so that's really what I'm thinking about there. And, you know, obviously we've talked about some of these things in the past, sort of like when I talk about like supply chain, the things I'm really thinking about is the healthcare supply chain, as well as our food systems, how we do sustenance in America. So those would be kind of like the key focuses within infrastructure. We're going to link at some point for you all our, you know, team's policy platform that has literally all the details under the sun. If I started reading off a 22-page document, you would all leave right now, and I would not blame you. So we're going to kind of just go through this kind of on the high level. But I just want to mention within democracy, we've already done this in the past for our democracy episodes. So you should go check this out. But, you know, some of the big things that I'd be focusing on is we got to continue to make this push on the For the People Act. I would be trying to get star voting on more of a state level, as well as trying to do bills on the federal level that would encourage us to embrace star voting. I'd be looking into term limits for, you know, both Congress as well as the Supreme Court. I would be looking to do campaign finance reform holistically and trying to rally support for a constitutional convention to occur. I'm not saying that that's the main thing, but I think we need a president who is vocal about that and is willing to encourage people and put pressure on for states to say, hey, you know, we do have to do something long-term to get a handle at this corruption. And then I'd be looking for a repeal of the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929, which caps the House at 435 members. And, we'd be looking to eventually also hopefully embrace a national popular vote as well. So those are the things that we'd be looking to do on the infrastructure side and democracy. If you want to hear more, again, I encourage you all to go check out that democracy episode we did. It was a really great time being able to break it down. And then we got to interview Adam Christensen at the very end. So we highly encourage you, if you want to go find out more about that, please go check out that episode. Then in terms of community care, 1 second, I'm grabbing my charger. The computer's dying here. Community care, we got universal basic income. Obviously, that's a big form of care for communities. Then where you got small business and labor support, things like, simplifying the process of, starting and operating small businesses in terms of regulation, assisting with permitting and acquiring of state aid, doing some trust busting within certain sectors like big tech and big ag. We would be looking to do also some increases in SEC enforcement and trying to get them some more teeth to be able to go after, companies that are abusive to the public. Then in terms of labor, we would be looking to do certain things like majority sign-up processes for unions. We'd be looking for first union contract provisions, trying to treat gig workers legally as regular employees, like eliminating right to work laws, doing things like paid family and medical leave, doing restrictions on like arbitration and non-compete clauses, passing the PRO Act, doing the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act by Bernie Sanders, and also passing a scaled minimum wage from $15 to $20 based on company asset sizes. So that would be what we'd be doing on labor. We would be doing a focus on family planning and abortion, where we'd be looking to not try and restrict women's access to abortion, but we would be looking to provide support to women so that, we want to encourage people that are, only going for an abortion because they don't feel financially able to be able to have one, to not have to go through that decision. If you don't want to have one and that's just not what you want, we're not going to stop you. That shouldn't be it. But we should help people who want the actual choice on whether they want to keep a baby. No one should feel pressured into feeling like they need to get rid of one because they don't feel economically secure to be able to handle it. So that's a big one. And I hate the idea of constantly trying to pay other people to take care of poor people's kids. Child Protective Services often does that with a lot of families. And I'd much rather us be investing in families so that they can be taking care of their own kids and having, more investment into direct households. That's really where I think we need to get more of our, general public investment. We would be looking to do also areas of elder care, veterans care, things like helping in incentivize hiring of veterans with payroll tax deductions, increasing of VA mental health resources, and, embracing things like Andrew Yang even had this idea of a civilian society reentry playbook. Obviously, many other people have. I should know more names, but I do recall this policy idea from Yang's platform that I really liked, is having just a comprehensive checklist of making sure that we completely help you reintegrate into society. Then in terms of education, I'd be looking to do things like increase and baseline federal funding to $5,000 per child. I'd be looking to increase after school programs to try and align school days with parents' work schedules and provide, basically an affordable means of childcare. I'd be looking to do free breakfast and lunch programs to both faculty and students. I'd be looking to try and increase public school teacher pay to at least $60,000. I'd be looking to try and incentivize states to adjust their curriculums to include more life skills and reduce the weighting of standardized testing. I'd be looking to do, increase training for teachers and mentorship programs for teachers. We would be looking to try and create federal incentives for states to include like a school nurses and psychologist in like every public school. We'd be looking to restore the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding so that we actually have our public school systems capable of handling more disabled children's needs. We'd be looking to do, incentivizing, increase public-private vocational training programs for high school students, so that everyone, before they go off to college and try and make decisions about what they want to do in their career, they have some work experience under their belt, and that'll help them get their future jobs as well. So I think that would be a big help, is if we start earlier. Now, obviously, we're not going to force people into this. We don't believe in that, but we do believe it should be an option and try and build more of these opportunities for people. And then we would do, obviously, like retrofitting of school buildings to ensure that they're, eco-sustainable and non-wasteful and have quality broadband internet. And then, ensuring that all public school students are being provided devices to ensure that they can do safe and effective distance learning if needed, as well as being able to perform all of the assignments. If they're being given homework out of school, we should make sure that they actually have the means to be able to do so at home. And so I think that's a great way for us to try and digitize a lot of households, is by helping parents as a starting point. And this is going to help spread it more and more over time. And then, we go into another thing in terms of community care. I think information is a big part. And so we would be looking to do some things in terms of media reform, making things like adjustments to Section 230 to not include content that's influenced by algorithms. We would be looking to do treatment of data as a property right. We may consider doing a media ombudsman program coupled with media dollars that is funded by VAT on advertising, so that people have some spending money to be able to afford subscriptions. And we have some level of oversight in making sure that there is, like, actual implementation of kind of fairness doctrine principles that we would be trying to reinstate, that people aren't just completely lying and causing damage to the general public's understanding of what the truth is if they want to have access to this public dollars program for the media. And the last thing is, we'd be also looking to try and invest not just like in a media program, but like actual journalism, trying to do like local journalism rebuild by like creating a fellowship program with funding that is distributed out to localities for a certain allocation of fellows to be able to be journalists within their area and get funding accordingly. So those are some of the things that I'd be looking to do in terms of the media. Then you got things like safety. We'd be having law enforcement. So that would include both enforcement of the law when it comes to immigration, as well as policing in general. So, things that I'd be looking to do there. Immigration, we would be trying to do punishing of corporations that do hire illegally. We would be funding the legal immigration process more. We would be including border surveillance and enforcement, but we would not be looking to do any walls. We would be looking to protect homeland security by separating it from ICE and being able to abolish the ERO that sits within ICE. We would be looking to create a pathway to citizenship for all existing illegal immigrants that takes 10 years in total for them to gain full citizenship, as well as within that period of time, they would be immediately reinstated as a legal permanent resident within the United States. And then furthermore, we would be looking to do reform on the visa sponsorship process so that it would be less dependent on corporate sponsorship, and that we would actually try and streamline the process so that we don't have, there's like this constant burden on undocumented immigrants, or not undocumented, that's the wrong phrase here. In this case, it's sponsored immigrants, to constantly have to re-ensure that their paperwork is being properly processed to ensure that they get to keep staying here. And so I think that process needs to be streamlined and less cumbersome. And so we'd be looking to make some reforms in that area. In terms of policing, we would be trying to reduce the overall responsibility of what cops handle by reducing those roles and separating it out. Like, think We in the past have done things like parking attendants, park rangers. These used to be positions that cops used to play. We would be looking to take away those things where I don't think we should be having cops as the primary source of, handling traffic control, let's say, for instance, or being the responders to mental health crises. I think we need units that are better equipped to handle those without lethal force being a potential option at all. So that'd be something that I'd be looking to do. I'd be looking to fund emergency response centers. I'd be looking to end basically victimless prohibitions, like prohibitions on drugs, sex work, and gambling. And for drugs, it'd be a decriminalization and a legalization of marijuana, as well as a legalization of certain hallucinogens. Like I think there is something to be said about legalizing psilocybin in America. Obviously, I mean legalizing with prescription, like legally having it be medically prescribed. But I do think that we need to be moving in that direction in general. And then we'd be looking to make general changes that would help people, kind of like we did for veterans when they come out of the military and come home to civilian life. We'd also be wanting to do that for prisoners who are trying to reintegrate into society. That would be another thing that we'd be looking to do. We would be looking to, in general, reduce state violence from the police. I think we do way too much cracking down on protests in America and are completely abusing our First Amendment right. I think that we need to do general restoration of voting rights for those who are formerly incarcerated. You've served your time. You should be reinstated with all benefits of what being an American citizen is. I think we should be fixing the prisoner pay system and economy, where, frankly, a lot of these basic services are currently draining the finances of prisoners, and they're being underpaid because they're allowed to be paid far below the minimum wage, like sometimes like even 1/20th of the minimum wage. So it's like it's an unfair system that even frankly undercuts the general labor economy. If a group can go hire super cheap prison labor, you think some might do it and not pay like regular workers to do that job? I think so. Like, think about this. I don't know how many of you remember this, but during the 2020 presidential election, Michael Bloomberg was caught on using prison labor as a contracted consulting group for basically doing calls for him. That group ended up using prison labor as the supply for those people. And so, like, it ends up undercutting a lot of things that, yes, civilians should be doing as jobs in general, or it should be paying people on the inside that wage so that they can afford the basics, like goods that they want within the system while they're already having their freedom being restricted. So I think there's something to be said about fixing kind of like the prison economy. And then we'd be looking to spread hotspot and focused deterrence policing efforts, which have been shown to be able to do massive reductions in violent crime. Then we would be looking to do things on national security, like, addressing the budget, trying to do more standardized trade where we would do, if you kind of fall within these criteria, things like focused on labor, the environment, currency manipulation, civil rights, intellectual property, we would be looking to, if you fall under those criteria, do free trade with you because you're upholding these values. But if you're not, then we would be looking to have tariffs imposed upon you roughly in 10%. We want to encourage other nations to be upholding certain standards. And obviously, one of the things that we'd be doing here is we don't want to come off as hypocrites. We should only be applying standards that we ourselves can even claim to be doing. Because so often it feels like we set a double standard in these regards. So anything that we would ever look to try and do before we would say, hey, this is a standard that everyone should be meeting, should be a reasonable standard that people should be meeting. We don't want to make it so high end that it ends up causing a trade war with people. But we do think that we can be using our trade as a means of diplomacy. And so we want to use it as such. And we'd be looking to do things like trying to revoke contracts with federal contracts with companies that do more outsourcing of labor, We would be looking to also do some of these programs that even Joe Biden's been proposing, like the Buy American plan, so that we can have more focus on developing domestic manufacturing so that we have a little bit less risk of our supply chain in, for instance, a global pandemic. It really stresses an economy out when you can't have as much free movement of goods because there are public health concerns. And so it's easier when it's within an individual country to have control of its supply, because who knows? Let's say the rest of the world, like they had at one point, basically shut off the rest of the US from being able to travel outward. That can be a problem for our supply chain. So we need to try and secure more of our own manufacturing here domestically. Furthermore, we'd be looking to do a whole variety of taxation reforms. I highly encourage you, if you want to go watch that, I did a bunch of them. I mentioned like a lot of them in the UBI video because that's part of the main thing we got to be like funding. So highly encourage you all to go check out that. And then we'd be looking to do investments into, public, physical, and mental health. So like things like healthcare reform, like the actual like provision of it, like the hospital systems of it, health insurance, prescription drugs, medical devices, how we do research, mental health and addiction services, and just improved general community health efforts. Things that usually can help get a community a bit more active, can help generally encourage public health, things that might be able to provide more nutritious food. There's a lot of different things. So we want to just generally help invest into community health efforts. And then we would be doing things like trying to build up FEMA to properly prepare for natural disasters, and be able to do adjustments to our general energy systems so that we can be starting to at least start to mitigate climate change and hopefully start to try and reverse that process. Likewise, let's try and do more efforts into cleaning up pollution and trying to do also things like geoengineering, like planting more trees is a form of geoengineering. We should be exploring all these options to try and be good stewards of our environment. We should be looking to make investments into cybersecurity because that's a lot of how we're doing, frankly, international relations nowadays. Is there's more and more need for us to have defense systems online rather than in traditional weapon systems. We need to be looking at like general reductions in violent crime and trafficking and gangs and cartels by doing things like making adjustments to gun policy and trying to end the war on drugs and making more efforts in trying to break up trafficking rings and making it decriminalized for sex work so people can more easily make reports if they're being abused or trafficked. There are a lot of things that we can be doing to try and improve America. And so I'm going to be releasing a bunch of details in the future. This took me a while of an answer, but I wanted to show that when you guys bring me the policy questions, I'm willing to take the time to give you some substance here. And so if I ran for president at some point, God, what would that be like? I have no idea. I probably would never actually want to run for president, to be fair. Like, I think that would be a miserable experience. And I am not I don't think I'm enough of a corporate sellout to get myself elected. But if I was to run for president or help someone run for president, those would be things that I'd be looking at, including in my platform. So yeah, that is what I would say to you all on that front. Let's go to our next question. So next question we got here comes from Fuzzface Jonah. After witnessing the Democratic primaries bury Bernie Sanders, do you think America will ever have a government-ran healthcare system? Yes, I do. I think the public sentiment is moving there. We are actually at a point where it is much more popular now than it was back in like the 90s when it was being argued for by the Clinton administration. I think it's going to take time. I think we are not going to be seeing healthcare, like universal healthcare, or frankly, government-run healthcare before we even see a basic income. Like, I actually think we're more likely to get a basic income like 2023, and like maybe we get to universal healthcare in the 2030s. It's The difference is this has a very vested industry that unfortunately has a stranglehold on both Democrats and Republicans. And so you have to wonder, like, can we get the proper campaign finance reforms done to kind of break that stranglehold? Can we win enough elections in time to be able to get it done? That's kind of where I'm hoping. Like, there's going to be a generational change in Congress at some point, and I'm kind of hoping that we win the next generation in a sense. So I think to answer your question, Jonah, the answer is yes. We would be looking to probably have universal healthcare, a public run system, some point. Wouldn't say exactly soon, though. Next one. OK Stanley asks, do you think Bolsonaro will win in 2022? I'll admit this is just complete, speculation. But I'm going to say no. I generally think that Bolsonaro has done a pretty terrible job when it came to COVID, and I think that can really cost him. And who was trying to remember who was running against him? Let me look it up. I think who was running against him? No, before I even say, because I don't know much about Brazilian politics. I'll be frank. So I don't want to really speculate too much about this election, but I would imagine that there would be some desire for him to leave, because I have heard at least a lot of the data on COVID that it did hit Brazil particularly hard. Is that Lula? Oh, if Lula would be a pretty strong challenge. I know he's a pretty contending left-wing voice, so maybe he would lose to that. I'll just say yes, but like completely disregard me as like someone who's knowledgeable on this and who really knows. I'll admit there's a lot more that I could be knowing on Brazilian politics that I do not know. So this is entirely just gut feeling from some macro factors of public health that I mentioned, but not going to say that with any confidence level. Next question. Will communism win? I don't know, but like, what's the time frame? Like ever? What's considered victory? If you mean in the sense of like, could it be achieved? Like the true idealistic form that we've had our guests come on here say, having a classless, moneyless, stateless society? I doubt it. I frankly think that you're going to always have some form of class within a society. There will always be some form of hierarchy. And it seems like we've been, frankly, building that up more and more over time as we've had population growth. And I don't know. I think it's a very vague sense of what does it mean by victory here, and what are we technically defining it as. I'm going to say no, but who knows? And if we're just talking in my lifetime, I highly doubt that, like, for instance, America is going to be a communist country in my lifetime, unless we achieve like some massive expansion of like lifespan in our lives. I'm not seeing it, but who knows? Who knows? Next one. Do you think Andrew Yang will ever be president? Realistically, probably not. I think he's going to do a lot of good in the influence. I think he's going to have achieved a lot of the goals that he wants. I think he's going to be a major influence who will be noted in why we achieve universal basic income eventually. But I don't think he's going to be president. I would support him if he ran. We would still try and fight against that potential destiny. But I don't, like, if I was actually betting right now, like someone comes up to me and says, hey, I'll bet you right now 50-50 odds Andrew Yang becomes president. I'm taking the no on that side of the bet. And I say that as someone who does deeply admire him. We endorsed him in this race for mayor, and we think he will become mayor. I do actually think that. But president, I don't see it. Okay, next one. Next question. What is your opinion on a movement to promote crowdfunding basic income for individuals through Patreon because we don't have UBI? The same way people crowdfund the money they need for medical expenses through GoFundMe because we don't have universal health care. So we've heard this in the past. We've had, I think it was Brian a couple weeks ago who came onto our program and talked about this general idea. And I think we even had Michael even talk about this kind of a little bit. So I've heard some people bring this notion up. I generally have some reservations on it. I generally think volunteerism is not exactly a particularly efficient way of funding a welfare system in an equitable manner. It ends up being a lot of poor people just kind of sharing the money around, which is still fine and good. And so I'm not going to say don't do it. Like, if you want to do it, I'd love to see this grow, but I feel like this isn't going to be the real benefit of what universal basic income can do. And I would have maybe some reservations on whether it will be like people feeling like having that trust that they're going to be included in, that they're not just having their money go be wasted by someone, for instance. I'm not 100% on it. I think I'd love to see it happen. I just don't think that would be my way of thinking we get to a UBI, but it is kind of like a mutual aid effort in a way. So it can still be good. I'm not going to deny that. We should be trying to do more cash relief efforts and getting money to people who need it, but I'm wondering how that system will evolve to the point where the people who actually don't need the money are the ones who are really giving their money away to the people who need it, instead of us kind of being reliant just on each other, the poor, just supporting the poor only. I feel like we need to do more than that, but hey, I'm not going to deny this is still potentially positive. So I'd love to see more. That's all I'll say on that. I want to see more of how it grows. Okay, next one we got here. Our next question is why? That's it. That's my question. Why? Well, why not? I mean, like, why is such an interesting question? Is it like, why are we here? Why in general? Like the idea of understanding? Why? All I say is why not? Like, does everything have to have a why in a sense? Like, sometimes things are just, they are what they are. And obviously we come more over time to understand it, but some things I think are just unknowable. Like, there are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns. And, some stuff we will find out is knowable. But I think inherently over time, there are things that we'll never know. And so why? Because. That's I guess how I'd answer that. just because. Okay, next question. Can I unpack the Aoc controversy? Boy, I mean, there's a lot that could be talked about here. There's like which specific one, but I guess it's mainly kind of this kind of fissure that some people have been noticing within some left-wing circles, where there is definitely a portion of the progressive movement that is more kind of a work within the system, reformist portion. And then there is a portion that's a little bit more of an aggressive populist movement. And so one is trying to kind of be more incrementalist and be more, it is frankly a little bit more conservative in how you try to achieve one's ends by working within the system rather than trying to take the risk of potentially enacting revolution. But there are, as I said, risk to revolution. Many revolutions don't work. Like, they get squashed by the boot and it causes way more damage. Rather than kind of almost like a lot of the peaceful revolutions have been some of the more successful ones, because it can build much more higher public will of support. But to the AOC issue itself, it's also kind of interesting because a lot of it is because she is so willing to kind of engage online with her community, where people, I think, go after her and target her because they kind of expect that she might actually hear it. And I think that gets perverted in a way where it's like when you only feel like one person is listening to you, you put so much weight on their shoulders to be the ones to achieve this. And so there are different bases who wanted different things when it kind of came to this issue of like force the vote. And I had torn opinions on it myself. We talked about it on two of our podcasts with Jen Perelman and Adam Christensen. They make convincing points on why there are some downsides to the tactic. And it's clearly, now that it didn't get embraced, it's clearly caused a fissure. But I mean, there is the notion that, hey, if you at least are doing this pressure to get Medicare for all, do we maybe get a public option vote? Like right now, we're getting the, ACA COBRA subsidies, and we're getting the Medicare eligibility buy-in, like age lowered from, 65 to 50, or 64 to 50. And I don't know, it doesn't feel exactly like even what Joe Biden promised. And so I feel like largely, and this, I've been feeling this too, especially I saw this video today from a recent interview, was I think on CNN, that Cori Bush had done. I might be wrong on what network it was done on, but it was an interview that Cori Bush had been asked about whether she would be willing to be kind of the same obstructionary force that Joe Manchin is sometimes within the Senate, along with the Squad and the Progressive Caucus, on some issues to be able to get their way. And she really emphasized this notion of, well, we are all individuals. We all have to just do what's right by our own individual districts. And I think this has been part of the frustrating problem from the people who are pro force to vote, is they feel like there's largely this unwillingness to actually wield power, to actually work together as a caucus and wield power. We aren't included a lot of the times at the negotiating table. Now, mind you, the other side of the aisle makes also their convincing points that, well, they're saying that they are starting to be included more at the table, that they're getting more committee positions. I remember they got included basically on the Rules Committee this year. A lot of the progressive voices got to be featured on that they got certain exemptions achieved in doing backroom deal pressuring in trying to get some PAYGO exemptions. Mind you, temporary PAYGO exemptions for COVID, but still something. And frankly, those will largely likely be maybe extended. Who knows? We have 2 years to hopefully achieve that. But there is some nuance here where it is this unfortunate fracturing within a movement because people are unwilling to tolerate tactical differences. And so this is one of the things where it's like, I don't have all the information of what AOC is doing on the inside. Who knows what she's being able to achieve with her colleagues? Obviously, we'd like to see more results. But frankly, a lot of the problems isn't the House. I mean, she currently is getting a lot, not she, but the Democrats in general are getting actually a lot of legislation through the House passed that are good. Maybe not perfect, but very good. Like we got the $15 an hour minimum wage through. We got the statehood for Washington, D.C. through. We've got George Floyd justice and policing through, H.R. 1 through. Like there's a lot of good things that we're getting through the House, but the problem is the Senate. And like AOC is not a senator. So it's like, it's weird that she gets so much of the burden. Like we need to be building up our ranks in the Senate. It is really hard for us to have any solid footing in trying to be able to get, any of our goals through when we have these people who are basically Democrats in red states like a Joe Manchin or a Kyrsten Sinema who just like constantly get this excuse of being like, well, I gotta go with my constituency here. And we all as Democrats are like, well, God, well, we just got obstructed by that one guy. And so it's like, we got to start having a caucus size where we can start not caring about Joe Manchin's and Kirsten Sinema's. Like, obviously, we also need to be using our power to block the bad bills. Like, we need to start, actually having people stand up and be obstructionists when, like, actual regressive stuff doesn't happen. But that's the thing. One of the problems of our inherent structure, and you can call it a problem, some people actually see this as a positive too, is it's inherently a system that is built to kind of retain itself very easily, because it is harder to basically get stuff done than it is to obstruct. And so that preserves the status quo. So if we got to kind of help reorganize the actual guts of the system, kind of a lot of these rules committee stuff, to be able to start actually breaking through the obstructionism. Because I don't want to have to keep having to be basically held captive by the Joe Manchin wing. We need to build up a Democratic caucus size that's big enough to withstand those people still bucking the party in the pursuit of, like, seeming independent for their red state that they run in. So to be honest, the AOC controversy seems sometimes like there is some missed nuance by both sides of the conversation, but I do feel like it is frankly ridiculous how so much of the weight just gets put on AOC alone to do this kind of force the vote type stuff, and she gets so much blame for it. And I never hear it, frankly, for like, or not never, but not as much. I don't hear it about like Bernie Sanders, who is in the Senate. And so I have to wonder if it's just because AOC has made herself more available that they try and take advantage of her. There are also people who wonder, is it sexism that they target her? Because I don't know. Who knows? There could be a variety of reasons that we're not going to try and speculate a mass collection of different minds of why they disagree and dislike her. We're not going to try and stereotype a whole group, but there are a large variety, and I think she does get too much unfair burden on it. But let's go back now to the questions. So next question. If I could eliminate one state from the USA, which one and why? Well, that is an interesting question. So if I was to eliminate a state, I would say get rid of a Dakota, make them one Dakota. Like, seems pretty reasonable to me. Like, that population does not justify two states. And I mean, like, come on. Like, I feel like that's reasonable. What else could be reasonable? Kicking out a state. I mean, obviously, you don't want to kick out any of the states. I'll say that first and foremost. Like, we all want to keep together. We want to have the United States, but I don't know. Maybe do the same thing with West Virginia and Virginia are very different. No, I'm sticking with the Dakotas. That is what I'm going with. Okay, next question. Next question is, what happened with Catfish Gate? So to just give context to Catfish Gate, I got catfished once. Very elaborate. I don't want to go into every part of the details, but let's just say it didn't do any harm other than I got fooled and felt my trust broken. Wasn't like particularly financially damaging, or not like they got a lot of salacious information on me, but it was just like, I was falling for someone who wasn't real. And basically, after finding out that they were not real, they kept basically trying to make me still take them back, essentially. And you're not going to take back someone who's a liar. Like, the number one thing in any relationship you need is trust. And so at that point, it's dead. But at one point, her grandmother contacted me and we talked on the phone, because she was just looking for context because apparently her granddaughter was like in the hospital and had done damage to herself, which I feel bad that anyone can reach that point where they feel that much pain. I've been there, not because I was a catfish, but I've been that place where I was doing self-harm to myself. And so I don't want to minimize that and like take joy in that. I would never do that. But I explained what had happened to her, and afterwards, then the granddaughter tried reaching out to me, and they just weren't willing to do anything which would actually justify like trying to make amends even. And at this point, I was like even asking myself, why am I still wasting time on this? I should just like clean break. And since then I have, but I was willing to give the time because when people do express that they do self-harm, I have a lot of empathy for that. So I wanted to make sure that if I could be helpful to prevent damage in some way, I still could. So that is my update on that. Full break now. Catfish story is dead. Next one. Education history, pros and cons. What is your education curriculum platform? Okay, so my education history is I grew up in a place called Montebello, New York. I went to this place called Suffolk High School, public high school, always through the public school system my entire life. Went off to college, went to Binghamton University. It's a SUNY school, so another public college. And I studied in my time. I got a major in business administration with a concentration in finance and entrepreneurship with a minor in economics. And in terms of what I would be looking to do in terms of like curriculum reform, I don't want to necessarily say like a mandate of specific classes, because I do believe that there needs to be some degree of flexibility on a local level of how you actually help people learn and you teach people. But some of the things that I think we need to make sure are achieved or have a focus on when educating would include things like life and survival skills, the ability to truth find and like critically think, communication skills. And I mean like oratory, written, all variety of manners of how we actually communicate as a human species. Even things like sign language, I think need a lot more inclusion within the process. I think we should be teaching more healthy living practices and just doing courses that, actually force people to live kind of in a healthy manner, like PE and such. And that should also include things like mental health and sexual and reproductive health classes. Like we should have a kind of comprehensive health lens to education. We should be teaching things like finance, operations, and risk management skills, frankly, in the educational setting. I think a lot more people need to know how to manage their own finances as well as understand how even businesses kind of operate, because it helps people understand when they're being taken advantage of. And as well, it helps them be maybe potentially more proactive if they see risks that makes them see that their job might be at risk. So these are some of the things we want to teach there. Things like creativity and innovation. We want to help people be more often capable of building and being self-sufficient and trying to grow off of existing knowledge. These are very important skills. We should include things like understanding kind of how society works by including things like sociology and civics and history. And then there's obviously, you want to include STEM within there, because obviously that is like how we do so much of our innovation and understanding of how life really works and can grow on terms of how we, structure society is through the technological means of what can humans even do. And then finally, I'd even include things like self-defense. I think people should know how to defend themselves so that, frankly, we are less dependent on like things like the police over time because we can be able to protect ourselves. I think these are all things that should be included. And obviously, it's like, when do you time them and what specific courses? I think a lot of that should be left to a local level. But I do think that is the general direction we need to be moving curriculums for public education in our primary school system. Okay, let's go to our next question. So our next question that we got here is, what is my most embarrassing moment, my saddest moment, my happiest moment, and then if I could eat one food for the rest of my life, what do you eat? Yeah, that's a lot of questions packed into one. So Justin, to your first one, embarrassing moment. I mean, I don't know. Like, this is one of the things I will say about myself. I try to not dwell on embarrassment, and I think a lot of people do. Like, we naturally kind of put up blockers to try and forget some of these things. I mean, I think about things like, I don't know. I guess the most embarrassing one was when I had found out, like, I was thankful for being alive, but like after I had attempted suicide at one point in high school, now what, like 9 years ago. How is an embarrassing moment, like realizing that they had to have said something to the school and people started to know. And this was on top of, I had just gotten over, like, frankly, being pretty mercilessly bullied during that period of time because of a really messed up and false rumor that one of my, I thought, best friends spread about me. Now I'm not ashamed of it, but like, kids are fucking nasty, and you don't know like what's bullshit or not until you like kind of go off and find yourself at points and become an adult. Like, they basically called me like an ass eater at that point, and I was just like, it bothered me that it was like literally everyone coming up to me. Now it's like, oh, all the cool kids do it, whatever. But like at the time, it felt like, what the fuck? Like, why does everyone have this notion of me? Sorry if that's TMI. And there was way more than that. I shouldn't say that's the only reason. That was actually probably like, I don't know, reason number like 8 on my list or something back at that point. But that was the most embarrassing moment. To your second part, which was, what was the saddest moment? I mean, same moment. That was my saddest moment. And then happiest moment. Happiest moment, I would say, is probably, I think it was when there's a bunch. I would say it was probably when I won the case competition, because it made me feel pretty like competent, that I could like at that point I was having like a confidence crisis in like college. I was still doing fine, but I just like felt like some of my peers were like finally kind of out competing me. Through the high school experience, I was always like a very quality student, like always top 10% of my class. And at that point I was like a little shook. And so winning that case competition, in doing like advising what I would be trying to do for Lego, and this was a case competition sponsored by PwC, was a very proud moment for myself because there was like a field of hundreds. So that made me very happy. When I pitched a perfect game in Little League. What else? My first home run on a major league sized field was pretty great. I've had great basketball games that I remember like being so elated. There is like so many things like happiness in relationships that now are no longer that I have. There's so many great memories that I cherish. It's hard to pick one. So I count my blessings that I've had still, despite a lot of also adversities in life, that I've had some major happiness as well. Okay, so that does it with this portion, but we had one more question that was also left for us on our page here from Nelson Orta. Nelson asked, can you rank the 2021 congressional special elections in order of importance? So, for those of you who are unaware, here is what we got going on in terms of the special elections. There was 5 in total, but we got 3 that are remaining. So the 2 that have already ended were in Louisiana. Louisiana's 2nd district had one that has completed, and Democrat Troy Carter won. And then Louisiana's 5th district had one that has been completed, and Republican Julia Letlow had won. The 3 that are remaining are New Mexico's 1st district, Ohio's 11th district, and Texas's 6th district. So in New Mexico's 1st district, each party actually just picked a nominee. And the Democrats picked Melanie Ann Stansbury. And this is a very solid Democratic district. It went plus 17 in 2018. Then you have Ohio's 11th district. Their primary is on August 3rd. That's when the primary is. And there are several candidates in the race, but the main ones that people have been focusing on have been Nina Turner, former director of Our Revolution, major surrogate for Bernie Sanders in multiple campaigns, versus Chantel Brown, who is kind of being portrayed as the more moderate candidate in that race. And so that is what's happening there. And then we have Texas's 6th district, which is early voting has already started. We actually tweeted that out. I think it was last week that we tweeted that out. And the actual election itself is on May 1st. And then there is likely going to be a runoff expected because there's like 23 candidates in the field. And so when it comes to some of the Democratic candidates there that people have been focusing on, it's been mainly Jana Lynn Sanchez, Sean Lasseter, and Lydia Bean. And so, Nelson, to your question about like how do you rank them, I actually think this is a very easy ranking. I would say first, right now, we should be focusing on getting the Texas 6th election done. That should be priority 1. The election is May 1st. That means it is literally, we're in the home stretch. There's 5 days left. We should be making sure that we know what candidate is getting through before we then reprioritize whether that's worth more effort, like a Democrat versus Republican election, and what quality of Democrat do we got there, versus the Ohio 11th election when it's a primary between like a progressive Democrat and a moderate Democrat. So I would say, ask me this question again in like 3 weeks, and we'll get back to you with a better answer. But I would say for right now, I would be pushing people to focus on the Texas 6th, pick one of those 3 candidates that you like, and try and support them. We need to get at least one of the Democrats into the top 2 slots. We don't want this to become a Republican versus Republican runoff, because that's possible. So let's make sure that we at least get one okay option into there for sure, before we then turn our attention in a couple weeks to, again, pushing in the Ohio 11th district for someone like Nina Turner. Now, mind you, there might be even other people in the field who deserve some other considerations, but I do think that Nina Turner is very clearly the progressive candidate in the race, and everyone else is some other version of a moderate. And so I think it's fair to say that we will be considering getting involved in supporting Nina at some point. But yeah, that's what I would say. Texas 6-1, Ohio 11-2, then New Mexico's 1st, 3rd. But that being said, everyone, that has been all of our questions in our AMA. Thank you all for those of you who have sent us questions. We really appreciated you taking the time to want to find out more. And as I had mentioned before, we'll be looking to try and release out more of those like policy details that we talked about through this AMA as well over time on our social media. That being said, if you want to find that, please go check the description section down below or go to any of our social pages and check the bios, and you will find our Linktree link, which includes all of our links to all of our communities and content. So that is really the hub of where you can find everything. Furthermore, if you like today's video, please let us know. Hit the like button as well as sharing it with your friends so that more people can see that we answered all of your questions today. So with that being said, my friends, I hope you stay classy out there, my basic people.